to be demonstrating some blacksmithing. What I'm going to make today is a leaf hook. We've got two examples here. I take one piece of steel. This is 12 inches, a 3/8 inch square steel, mild steel, and I shape this hook out of that one piece of steel. One end I shape into a hook with a little decorative end. I put a little twist in there. I like to put a depression where I'll drill a hole for a nail or a screw. And then the whole leaf itself, it's all made from one piece of steel. Often I brush them like this with a power brush. It gives it a nice satiny look, and you can see I've drilled the hole. That just basically gives a countersink. Makes it look a little nicer. So why don't we get started? I'm going to set these aside, take my steel, and 12 inches is a fairly short piece, so I'm using gas forge. It's my heat source. So I'm going to be using tongs to hold the steel for the duration of the demo. I'll mostly be using 2 to 3 types of tongs that I've picked out. While the steel is heating up to temperature, it'll get up to I like about 2,000 degrees for general forging of this material. What I was going to say about tongs is often blacksmiths will have many, many tongs. Visited some old-time master smiths with literally hundreds and hundreds of tongs. And at first, if you're not familiar with smithing, you might wonder, well, why do they have so many tongs? Well, typically every project, every piece is a different shape. So part of the tradition of blacksmithing is tool making, and often what happened as different projects were made, say a gate, a railing, whatever, a tool, you might say, oh, I need a different pair of tongs. I can't really hold this properly, so we'll just make one. Then they'll put it on the rack, and then that'll happen next month or next year. And then eventually they have a whole history of their work, basically, in all of these tongs. Anyway, so I can see my steels come up to temp. I like a good orange color like that. I'm going to bring it over to the anvil. And the first step is I'm just going to make a blunt point. I do this at the back edge of the anvil. And a very blunt point like that. And I'll heat that up again, and then I'm going to use this funny looking tool here. Nicknamed the guillotine tool because of this up and down guillotine action. You can replace these with different attachments. These are round. So what I'm going to do to the stock next is called fullering. I'm going to fuller the stock or make an indentation in the stock. So I've got this tool ready and a nice big hammer. I'm going to neck in or create an indentation right about there. Now, I want to make sure I get a good indentation, but I don't want to make it too thin. So that looks good, maybe a little air in there, and I've got it. So that indentation will define the point in between the leaf and the stem. And I'm going to spread the material out left and right, and that will swell, draw it out, blacksmith would say, and flatten, and that will form the leaf shape. So I like to just give it a couple taps to get it just started with the flat of the hammer. Now the cross beam, I'm really watching the shape of the leaf develop as I go. Right about there, I'll stop at a low red color. If I hammer below that, the steel can crack. And I want to wipe the anvil off. That's fire scale, a layer of burned steel. So I'm about halfway there. This typically does take 2 heatings, 2 to 3 heatings or heats, the blacksmiths would call it. And then my tongs have gotten hot, so I'm going to quench them in water. I do that frequently so the tong doesn't get too hot to hold. And also if the tong gets too hot, it loses its shape. Okay. So again, using the cross beam, very subtle motion, moving the steel back and or rotating left and right. What I'm doing is adjusting the shape of the leaf as I go. I'm going to stop there because I see it's starting to lose that red color. Especially with forms like this leaf, the area I necked in becomes a stress, some will call it a stress riser or a weak point. So if I push the steel too far, work it when it's not red, it will definitely crack. So I'm going to heat it, frequently. So maybe one more heat to finish up that leaf. Now I've got the width that I like. Couple taps to straighten things out. Okay, I've got the basic leaf profile. I like it, looking pretty good. It's got a nice little texture. It's about the right thickness. Don't want it too thin. Or it gets too fragile, too thick, it's hard to manipulate and reshape. Next, I'm going to form a crease down the center of the leaf. So this crease right down the center, and even you can see it on the back. Now to do that, I'm going to use a couple tools. I like, since I'm working alone, to use a treadle hammer. This replaces a striker or someone with a sledgehammer. You could also use a helper with the sledgehammer. And then I have what's called a V-block in here to hold the leaf. And then I'm going to form the crease with the hot cut, this hatchet-like shaped tool. Now I'm not going to cut the steel, just shape the steel. So here we go. Got a nice heat, good color. Now bring it out, try to get it nice and centered. Okay, just like that. So I formed a crease, and then I'll reheat it, and I'll close the leaf up. So I'm going to literally close it next. Now, I think I'm going to switch to a little lighter hammer. I don't need the heaviest hammer to do the next few steps. Okay. So now I want to close this, taking my time, carefully looking at the leaf, trying to get it more or less even. Okay. So I close it up. Now I'm going to open it. So now I'm going to use the same tools to open it. Sometimes when you close it, it can be a little hard to get it started with the hot cut to open it. So it's always good to have a backup plan. I have a very simple backup plan. Flat screwdriver, pry it open. Something simple as that, often keep it simple, right? Works great. And if that doesn't work, sometimes I put it in a vise and use a hand chisel and open it up. Sometimes, often I should say it's not necessary, but it's good to have a backup plan for things like this, because sometimes they can be quite stubborn. Okay, so let's go to the treadle hammer and see if I can open that up. I want to line it up just right. Okay, good. And open. Again, I don't want to stomp on that too hard because I don't want to cut it. It's still hot enough where I can open it up most of the way. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, I want to give it an indication of some veining in the leaf. And I found a very simple thing that works is just to take the hammer, use the same cross peen, and hammer the leaf to give it some ridges. It kind of helps indicate some veining. So I do that on one of the edges of the anvil. I think I'll leave it like that. So I'm going to put a little veining in there, a little more natural shape. Okay, so back into the fire. Here's my sample. So eventually I'll shape the leaf a little bit, give it a little bit of a, make it a little bit more organic shape. Yeah, but I'd like to create the stem next. I find that works a little better for me. So we're going to work on the stem. For that, maybe I will pick the larger hammer. That's a 1,000-gram hammer, just because they're European hammers. This other one I was using was a 600-gram hammer. Now, I started on the edge of the anvil. I'm basically using the edge or the corner of my hammer, hammering two sides to reduce that thickness and to create a taper in the steel. Good start on that. So the reason I wipe the anvil off is you don't want to get, it's not a good idea to let a lot of fire scale build up on the anvil. It gets beaten into the steel. A lot of smiths will brush their steel with the steel brush between each heat. With gas forging, I don't feel that personally that's necessary with what I'm doing today. Anyway, okay, so let's continue. A little bit thinner, a little bit more pointy. Longer, gradual taper, and then to knock the corners off. And then round it by rotating and hammering that whole area. Now, again, I got to stop because it's lost that high temperature. So you can see it's a narrow working range that I have. I need to get it a little smoother. So there's an old saying in blacksmithing, if you want to make a taper, a round taper, square, octagon, round. So first I shaped the material square, drawing it down into that pointy tapered shape as a square, simply because it's the fastest, most efficient way to move the steel. And then if I want it round, I knock the corners off, basically creating an octagon. And then I knock the corners off the octagon, rotate, and create a round shape. So let's finish up that taper, smoothing it out, getting that nice and round. I'm really looking at things and making sure, yeah, I've got it nice and smooth. Okay, so you can see I've got nice and round and this nice transition between the round and the square bar. So next I'd like to actually shape, like I was saying, shape the leaf itself. Give it a little bit of a flair, a little more organic look. So I like to use scrolling pliers. They look a lot like needle nose, but they're round, or chain nose if you're a jeweler. I like to use these. To make it easier to hold, I like to put it in the blacksmith's vise over here. And I find I often don't really need to clamp it as much as just hold it in the vise. Okay, so here we go. Oh, pardon me, I left these tongs here. Here we go now. So the vise is just help holding one side stationary as I shape the other side. Okay, it has a much more, has kind of a ripply, for lack of a better term, it's rippled. It has a much more lifelike shape, I think. If I just left it flat, it would be very plain. So now I can shape the stem after I reheat it. And then, actually before that, got ahead of myself there for a second, I want to actually do the twist. So I'll put a decorative twist, my sample here, in next. Now the reason I'm going to do that next is I need to hold on to something to twist. So I don't want to shape this, do more shaping up there before I put a twist in. A nice orange color. I'll turn it around. In this case, I like the leaf facing up. Clamp about there. My wrench. Okay, so now I've got a twist. Take it out of the vise. And then I like to straighten things out if possible by putting it on the corners, the square bar and the corners. Put it in the vise and use the vise itself to straighten it. Usually that's sufficient. Looks pretty good. If not, I use a wood mallet to adjust. What I will do over here on the treadle hammer, so I have to set that up. I'll take my V-block out and I'll put this in. So before they add tools like a treadle hammer, you'd improvise. There's devices, simple things you can do to clamp steel to the vise, or you can put a heavy chain over the steel to hold the steel on the anvil, I should say, so you could hold the tool and then strike. But even better is to have an apprentice or helper to hold or swing a sledgehammer. Okay, so to the treadle hammer, a little indentation in, line it up, and stomp. Got my indentation. That was just a ball peen hammer, makes a nice indentation. you can use a special tool for that, but I found that particular ball peen, I shaped it a little bit, to be honest. Works quite well. I like the shape that it leaves. Okay, so now I'm going to use my scrolling pliers and make this look a little bit more lifelike. Look how easy that is to bend. Okay, so I've got the top basically done, just needs a little fine tuning, but I'm not going to obsess about it at this point because now I'm going to shape the hook on the other end. And it very well might get bent when I do that, so I might as well clean that up later. So now I'm switching to another type of tongs that'll allow me to go around the leaf so I don't squish that shape and hold the stock. I'll go in and heat the other end, and now I can hammer the other end. Now, I can do that by hand, shape this, of course. I like to use a chisel taper, or kind of like that flat screwdriver. Could be a point, could be a round point. I just think this is kind of nice shape. These are used to hang up all kinds of things on the wall, coats, jackets, whatever you want, extension cords, what have you. If you have something sharp, you know, and you put a jacket on it, it might poke a hole in the jacket. So I like to put this little curl at the end. And I think I'll go with the chisel taper today. Now, I'll do a little bit on the power hammer, so it's a little faster, and then I'll do a little by hand. So, I'm going to take the steel. Basically, think of this as a 132-pound sledgehammer. So it's a pretty simple device, actually. The harder I push the pedal, the harder it hammers. So I've created this chisel taper, this point, but you noticed I also hammered this area. And the only reason I was doing that was I like a little texture in the work. It looks a little more handmade. And I could do that by hand with the hand hammer, of course. But since I was already at the power hammer, it was already hot, I just used the power hammer to hammer that length, give it a little texture, give it a few hammer marks. So now I'm going to shape that little tip. And to shape that tip, I'm going to basically roll it over the edge of the anvil. Now, this edge is actually rounded, whereas this edge is rather sharp. I'm going to do that on the rounded edge so it doesn't leave a cut or a bad mark in the steel. So I do a little bit at a time, and I push forward, repeatedly hammering, and then a little bit this way, and then down, and then really look at the shape and make adjustments as necessary. And there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to bend that around into the hook. What I'm going to use is the rounded horn. These are double horn anvils, one on each side. So I'm going to use the round horn because I want a round shape. This is used for other things, other shapes. Now, before I actually shape the hook end, the actual hook part, I'm going to cool the very tip. And the reason I do that is if I don't cool that tip, when it's red hot, it is soft, so it will lose its shape. So I'm just keeping, I want to keep that shape. So I cool it simply to help keep it from deforming. Okay, so now I'll go around my horn. So I've got the hook shape. Now I want to finish up any final adjustments. So I'm going to heat the whole thing. And maybe I'll switch back to these other tongs. So I remember doing a demonstration once or twice. Somebody asked me if I ever get burned. Usually it's the kids, you know. Do you ever get burned? Yeah, unfortunately, that working with any hot material, it kind of goes with the territory. But you learn, you know, to be careful, and you learn what you can do and what you shouldn't do so you don't get hurt. Okay, so just a little adjustment. Ideally, I'd like this. So I'm looking at the shape. Make a little fine tuning. Only one minor thing I don't like. I could have just leave it alone, but it is leaning just a little to the side. So I'm going to put it in the vise. See if I can't correct that. Then I'm going to go back to the anvil. Okay, so at that point, I've lost enough heat that if I were to hammer anywhere near that leaf and that stem, I know it would crack because it's thin and it's quite delicate, relatively speaking. So I'm going to heat that up just a little bit. And there we go. So the reason I want it to stand up on the anvil as it is now, flat like that, is this is a wall hook. So this will go on the wall. So if it doesn't sit flat on the anvil, it's not going to sit flat on the wall. So I always check on the anvil. If it stands up on its own, you're in good shape. Okay, so what I like to do when I'm finishing up, when I've done all the shaping, is I take a steel brush. I just like to brush the surface to remove excess fire scale, makes it look a little nicer. And Then I'll cool it off, and you can take a closer look at it. Now I've done leaves like this and as big as 1-inch stock for some of my larger pieces I've done, furniture and lamps, things like that. So this one really, you just saw it, it didn't take that long to make, but if you make one out of bigger stock, it takes a lot longer, of course. So the 1-inch stock one, so it was a couple years ago, I remember they took about an hour just to make one leaf. But it was well worth the effort because you get a really nice natural, I think natural looking leaf, has a nice texture, has a nice shape. Just kind of drying it off a little with my gloves so you can see it. Okay, there we have one forged leaf hook, all for one piece of 3/8-inch square steel. Of course, you can make these in thicker stock sizes, but I find this is a good general size or general purpose work, and they're amazingly strong. They give you, this will hold probably over 100 pounds easily. I know because I've hung up a lot of stuff on them, a lot of cords and cables and whatnot. So I'll leave you with just a little funny story. I know a blacksmith, to demonstrate how someone asked him how strong, he was making a 1/4-inch hook, how strong it was. He hung it up on the ceiling. This guy is so strong. He did a pull-up with his pinky. And this guy was a big guy. So, you know, the steel is really amazingly strong. Yet, as you saw, amazingly plastic. You can form it, shape it. Wonderful material to work with. Well, thank you for watching my demo. If you're interested in classes, I do teach classes in the studio, and I'll be also there's a number of videos on YouTube and TMA YouTube, which you can also check out. Thank you so much. If you have any comments, you can go ahead and leave. Thank you.